I didn't realize how quiet a ballroom could feel until my name wasn't said. 800 people sat beneath crystal chandeliers at the Grand Willow Hotel in Charleston, South Carolina, their applause rolling like warm thunder after each name my stepdaughter thanked. Her father, her grandparents, her friends, her coworkers, even her college roommate from Ohio who'd once locked herself out of the dorm at 3 in the morning. And then she stopped. She smiled. The microphone crackled. The applause swelled again. But my name never came. I stood there in a powder blue dress I'd paid to have altered twice, my hands folded around a clutch I'd carried since my own wedding 37 years ago, and I felt something old and familiar split open in my chest. Not surprise. Not anger. Recognition. Because I'd been disappearing from her story for years. I just didn't know this was how publicly it would end. My name is Margaret Maggie Callahan. I'm 64 years old. I live in Mount Pleasant, just outside Charleston, in a white clapboard house with creaky stairs and a magnolia tree I planted the year my husband died. I raised my stepdaughter Emily from the time she was 6 years old, long before she became the bride everyone was standing for. I met her father, Robert, when I was 27. He was a widower, quiet in the way men get when grief settles into their bones. Emily had lost her mother to cancer the year before. She barely spoke when we first met, just clutched a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing and watched me like I might disappear too. I promised myself I wouldn't. I packed lunches shaped like animals. I stayed up through chickenpox and science fairs and middle school heartbreaks. I learned how she took her cereal, milk first, then flakes, and how she liked her nightlight angled just so. I sat in the front row of every recital, even when she wouldn't look at me afterward. I told myself love didn't need acknowledgement to be real. Then Robert died suddenly, when Emily was 22. A heart attack. No warning.
No goodbye.
Just a phone call that turned my knees to water and left me a widow before I ever got used to the word wife. Emily pulled away after that. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just quietly. Calls returned days later. Holidays split fairly. Invitations phrased carefully. And when she got engaged to Daniel Reyes, a software engineer from Austin, Texas, I was happy for her, but I noticed I wasn't asked to help plan anything.
No dress shopping. No cake tasting.
No mother of the bride role, even unofficially. I told myself it was fine. I told myself not everything needed a label. Until the wedding. Until the microphone passed from hand to hand and skipped right over me. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where it ends. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel, her groom, shifted beside her. He leaned toward the microphone, his hand tightening around it like he was steadying himself. He looked out at the room, then straight at me. And he said my name. Not gently. Not casually. He said it like it mattered. And in that moment, I realized the story wasn't over. It was just about to change. When Daniel said my name, my first instinct was to look behind me. That's how invisible I'd learned to feel, like surely he meant someone else. Some other Margaret. Some other woman who hadn't spent 18 years folding herself quietly into the background of someone else's life. But his eyes didn't move. They stayed on me. The room shifted then. I could feel it. Chairs creaking, heads turning, whispers rippling across the linen-draped tables. Emily stiffened beside him. I saw it in her shoulders before I saw it on her face. Daniel cleared his throat. Before we leave this room, he said, voice steady but tight, there's someone missing from the thank you list. And I can't stand here and pretend that's okay. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. Because suddenly I wasn't in a ballroom anymore. I was back in Greenville, South Carolina, standing in a small yellow kitchen with linoleum floors, holding a permission slip Emily had forgotten to mention until 10 minutes before the school bus arrived. I remembered how Robert used to say, she's not your responsibility, and how I never listened. I remembered learning how to braid hair from a YouTube video at 2 in the morning because Emily had cried after a classmate told her she looked messy. I remembered sitting alone in my car during her high school graduation because there was limited seating and her biological aunt had flown in from California. I remembered pretending not to notice. After Robert died, people assumed I'd step aside. that the connection ended with him. Emily never said it outright, but grief gave her permission to redraw lines without explanation. I told myself she needed space. I told myself love meant patience. What I didn't tell myself was how lonely it felt to grieve a man and a child at the same time. Daniel didn't rush his words. He spoke like someone who'd been holding something heavy for too long. I didn't grow up with a stepmother, he said. But I grew up watching what happens when people rewrite history, because it's more convenient. Emily's hand trembled in his. I met Maggie 3 years ago, he continued, and I didn't know the whole story. I just knew she showed up. Every time. Quietly. Without asking for anything. A few people nodded. Others frowned. Emily finally turned to him. Daniel, she whispered, low and urgent. He didn't stop. I asked Emily once why Maggie wasn't sitting with the family during holidays. She said it was complicated. He paused, then added, so I asked Maggie. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. I asked her what she wanted from Emily, he said. Do you know what she said? He looked at me again. She said, I just want her to be happy. Even if that happiness doesn't include me. The room was silent now.
No clinking glasses.
No servers moving. Just breath held collectively, like the moment before a storm breaks. Emily's eyes filled. I saw something else there too, conflict.
Fear.
Recognition. Daniel turned back to her gently. I can't start a marriage by letting someone who mattered this much be erased. My knees buckled slightly. I gripped the back of the chair in front of me. Because for the first time in years, someone else was telling the truth out loud. And I didn't know if Emily was ready to hear it. Emily's face changed in a way I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, when something cracked through her certainty and left her exposed. I didn't erase you, she said into the microphone, her voice thin. I just didn't know where you fit anymore. That sentence hurt more than silence ever had. Because the truth was, I had spent years making sure I fit wherever she needed me, even if it meant shrinking. Daniel didn't argue with her. He simply stepped back and let her speak, the way you do when you love someone enough to let them stumble toward honesty. I finally sat down. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. As Emily spoke about her childhood, about her mother, about her father, I realized something with a strange clarity. She truly didn't know what it had cost me to stay. She didn't know I turned down a promotion in Atlanta because it would have meant changing school districts when she was finally making friends. She didn't know I emptied my savings after Robert died so she could finish college without loans, then told her the money came from insurance paperwork she didn't need to worry about. She didn't know I stayed in a marriage that often felt like living beside a ghost because I was afraid of being one more woman who left her. I never told her any of that, because I thought love that needed explaining wasn't love worth having. Emily's voice wavered. When my dad died, everything felt unstable. Maggie, you felt permanent. And I didn't know how to look at that without feeling guilty. The word permanent landed hard. I'd built my entire life around being unmovable for her. And somehow that had made me invisible. Daniel reached for the microphone again, but softer now. Emily, permanence isn't something to feel guilty about. It's something you inherit. She looked at him, tears spilling freely. Then she looked at me. Really looked. For the first time in years, her eyes didn't slide past mine. Maggie, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't thank you, because I didn't know how. I didn't know what name to give you. I almost laughed. Almost cried. I didn't need a name, I said, surprising myself by standing. My voice carried without shaking. I just needed to know I wasn't a footnote. The room exhaled. Emily stepped off the dais before anyone could stop her. She crossed the floor in her wedding dress, tripping slightly on the hem, and stood in front of me like she had when she was small, unsure, hopeful, afraid. I thought if I thanked you, she whispered, it would mean choosing you over my mom. That was it. That was the wound. I reached for her hands. No, I said. It would mean letting us both exist. She collapsed into me, then really collapsed, and for the first time since Robert's funeral, I held her while she cried. Not as a guest. Not as an obligation. As family. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was slow. Earned. The kind that comes when people realize they've witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, but needed to. Daniel wiped his eyes and smiled at us both. Later, after the speeches ended and the music started, Emily pulled me aside. "I didn't invite you to the head table because I was afraid people would ask questions," she admitted. I nodded. "I know. I don't want to be afraid anymore," she said. Neither did I. But I also knew something else now. Love doesn't disappear when it goes unrecognized. It just waits. And sometimes it takes a stranger, standing beside the person you raised, to finally say what you never demanded to hear. The music returned slowly, like the room itself was testing whether it was allowed to breathe again. People stood. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. Life resumed in that careful way it does after something real interrupts it. Emily went back to Daniel, her cheeks blotchy, her mascara ruined, and for a moment I thought that was the end of it. The truth spoken, the wound acknowledged, and then politely folded away for later. That's how these things usually go. But not this time. 10 minutes later, a server approached me. "Ma'am," she said softly, "the bride asked if you'd join them at the head table." I looked down at my hands. They were still trembling. For years, I had practiced not expecting that invitation, not wanting it. Wanting it had hurt too much. So when I walked up to that table, past cousins who looked confused, past friends who suddenly avoided my eyes, I felt like an imposter stepping into a life I'd already lived without recognition. Emily stood when she saw me. She pulled out the chair beside her. "This seat was always yours," she said, not loudly but clearly. "Isette." And something subtle but profound shifted. Not the way people looked at me, but the way Emily leaned toward me when someone asked a childhood story. The way she reached for my hand during dinner, as if testing whether I was still there. Later that night, during the father-daughter dance, the DJ hesitated. There was an awkward pause. Then Emily walked over to me again. "I know this isn't traditional," she said. "But would you dance with me?" I thought of all the traditions I'd honored quietly. All the lines I'd stayed behind. "I'd love to," I said. The song was an old Motown track Robert used to play on Sunday mornings. I don't know if Emily planned that, or if it was coincidence. Either way, it undid me. She rested her head against my shoulder, just like she had when she was 7 and scared of thunderstorms. "I didn't know how to say thank you without admitting how much you gave up," she whispered. And I was afraid if I admitted that, I'd have to face how much I took. I held her tighter. "You were a child," I said. "Children are supposed to take." "But I'm not a child anymore," she said. "And I don't want to lose you because I was too scared to name you." That word again. Name. After the wedding, Emily and Daniel came to my house before leaving for their honeymoon. The same house Emily had avoided for years because it felt too full of memories. She stood in the doorway of the living room, looking at the photos on the mantel, the school pictures, the graduations, the one blurry snapshot of Robert holding us both. "You kept all of this," she said. "I never stopped," I replied. She turned to me. "I want my kids to know you," she said simply. "Not as Dad's wife. Not as a complication." She swallowed. "As their grandmother." I didn't answer right away. I'd learned that some gifts need to be unwrapped slowly. "I won't take your mother's place," I said. "But I won't disappear either." She nodded. "That's all I want." After they left, the house felt different. Not quieter. Not fuller. Balanced. I sat alone at the kitchen table long after midnight, still in my dress, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, thinking about how close I'd come to walking out of that ballroom unseen. If Daniel hadn't spoken, if I hadn't stood up, if love had stayed silent one more time, I realized then that raising a child doesn't always mean they'll recognize you when it counts. Sometimes, it means trusting that the truth you lived will surface, even if it's spoken by someone else. And sometimes, it arrives at a wedding, right when you think you've already lost your place. A week after the wedding, Emily called me at 7 in the morning. Not a text, not a delayed voicemail, a call. I was standing at the sink, rinsing a coffee mug, when I saw her name light up my phone. For a second, my hand hovered. Old habits die slowly. Part of me still expected distance to return once the moment passed. But I answered.
Hi, sweetheart, I said.
She exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath since Charleston. I just wanted to hear your voice. That's when I knew the wedding hadn't been a performance. It had been a turning point. Over the next few weeks, things changed in quiet, unmistakable ways. Emily sent photos from the honeymoon. Messy hair, bad lighting, unfiltered happiness. She asked for my pot roast recipe, the one she used to claim smelled too old-fashioned. She started ending calls with, "Love you," and didn't rush off afterward. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space in her life. One afternoon, she came over with a small box.
No announcement. No ceremony.
I found these in Dad's old desk, she said, setting it on the table. Inside were letters. Notes Robert had written to me during the early years, about Emily, about how grateful he was that I stayed when parenting got hard, about how he hoped she'd one day understand what love looks like when it's chosen daily. Emily picked one up, her hands shaking. He knew, she said quietly. He knew I'd struggle to say it. Yes, I said. But he trusted you'd feel it eventually. She looked at me then, not as a daughter guarding loyalty, not as a bride balancing narratives, but as a woman seeing her past clearly for the first time. I'm sorry it took a wedding microphone and my husband stepping in, she said. But I don't want to live my life pretending you were optional. Neither did I. I didn't need apologies anymore. What I needed, what I'd always needed, was presence that didn't disappear when things got uncomfortable. A few months later, Emily introduced me at a dinner party. This is Maggie, she said, without hesitation. She raised me.
No qualifiers. No explanations.
Just truth. I'm still 64. I still live in my white house in Mount Pleasant. The magnolia tree is taller now. The stairs still creak. But when I set the table for holidays, I don't wonder anymore whether my chair will be filled. Raising a stepchild teaches you something most people never learn. Love doesn't guarantee acknowledgement, and silence doesn't mean failure. Sometimes it means you stayed long enough for the story to catch up. I didn't raise Emily to thank me. I raised her to be honest. And in the end, she was. Not because I demanded it, but because someone finally told the truth out loud, and she was brave enough to let it stay.